welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
So today, we're tackling just one source. It's an article, actually, and it's asking this question that, well, it feels like it's everywhere right now. Is masculinity in some kind of crisis, or is it maybe just evolving?
It's such a huge topic, isn't it? And this article does a good job, I think, of looking at it through different lenses, history, psychology, culture. It gives us a solid framework to, try and understand what's really going on.
Absolutely. And that's our mission today, really, to kind of cut through some of the noise around this, pull out the main ideas from this source, maybe challenge a few assumptions along the way, and just get a clearer picture of how masculinity might be adapting to the 21st century. Think of this as your shortcut to getting a handle on this whole dynamic shift.
Okay, so where does the article start? It really goes back to basics, to the historical foundation, how we even defined being a man traditionally.
Right, the sort of classic definition, which for a long, long time, the source says, was really built around, three main pillars? Providing?
Yep, providing.
Protecting.
Right,
Protecting and performing under pressure. That ability to kind of keep it together.
Exactly. And tied into that were these virtues, right? Stoicism, that kind of stiff upper lip thing, a certain level of dominance maybe. Physical strength was huge.
Yeah. And the article argues these weren't just like personality traits. They actually shaped the roles men were expected to fill in society. Things like military service or even just being a dad.
And it gives some really helpful historical examples to make it clear, like ancient Greece.
Oh, yeah. What about ancient Greece?
Well, the ideal there involved bravery. Physical perfection was a big one. But also, interestingly, intellect was part of the mix, too, like Hercules, strong, brave. Maybe the intellect part varied, but that archetype.
Gotcha. Brawn and bravery, mainly.
Then, fast forward to the Industrial Revolution. The focus shifts again. Masculinity gets really tied up with endurance, being the provider through just sheer hard work.
Like the factory worker image.
Precisely. That tireless worker, that became a key part of the definition then.
And then closer to our time, post-war America. That's where we get that really strong image of the stoic breadwinner, the leader. The article uses Don Draper from Mad Men as a kind of shorthand for that.
Yeah, successful on the outside, but keeping all the emotions tightly locked down.
But, and this is key, the article stresses this wasn't like fixed forever. Time, technology, new ideas.
Yeah.
They all started to change the game.
Massively. Which leads us straight into the huge shifts in gender norms, especially in the 20th and 21st centuries. I mean, things changed fast.
They really did. You had women entering the workforce in massive numbers, completely changing the economic landscape.
Right, and the rise of the LGBTQ+ movement challenging those really rigid binaries, plus a growing understanding of non-binary identities. All of this started to chip away at that old, narrow box for masculinity.
So it wasn't just impacting women or LGBTQ+ folks. It directly challenged what it meant to be a man, too. Suddenly, maybe being the sole provider wasn't the only way. Maybe suppressing emotions wasn't necessary.
Exactly. The source suggests these changes actually cracked things open, created space for something different.
Yeah, like encouraging or even expecting men to show traits that used to be labeled, feminine.
Things like vulnerability, empathy, being collaborative.
And the article is pretty clear. This isn't about masculinity getting weaker. The argument it makes is that the definition is just broadening, becoming less restrictive, maybe.
Precisely. Which inevitably brings us to feminism, because you can't really talk about shifts in masculinity today without addressing the role of feminism. And sometimes, it gets blamed, doesn't it?
It does. There's that narrative out there that feminism is somehow dismantling manhood. But the source pushes back on that.
Yeah, it takes a clear stance. It says feminism fundamentally is about gender equity, equal opportunities and rights, not about, female dominance. And from that viewpoint, it argues feminism hasn't just helped women, it's also helped men break free from those really limiting old roles.
Yeah, how so? What specific impacts does it mention?
Well, by challenging those rigid gender stereotypes, it suggests feminism has actually encouraged more emotional freedom for men, helps to dismantle harmful ideas like men don't cry or that showing vulnerability is weakness.
Okay, so opening up emotional expression. What else?
Promoting shared responsibility. In parenting, in housework, moving away from the idea that that's only women's work, which, the source argues, allows men to be more involved fathers and partners. A positive evolution, basically.
Right, so the article's take is feminism isn't the enemy of men, but rather an invitation into a more balanced society, one where men are maybe freed from some pretty unrealistic expectations.
That's the core argument it presents on that point, which connects nicely, actually, to this other really loaded term, toxic masculinity.
Yes. That one definitely sparks debate. How does the source handle it?
Carefully. It makes a very clear distinction first. It says the term does not mean that masculinity itself is toxic.
That's crucial, isn't it? So it's not attacking being male.
Not at all. What it is describing, according to the source, are specific cultural pressures and norms that push men towards behaviors that end up being harmful to themselves and others. It's about the negative consequences of a certain rigid, unhealthy model of manhood.
Okay. And what kind of behaviors does it list as examples?
Things like defaulting to aggression instead of communication, suppressing emotions almost completely, homophobia, misogyny, and that core idea that any kind of vulnerability is weakness.
And the article points out the dangers if these norms aren't challenged.
Yes. It links them to poor mental health outcomes for men, increased likelihood of violence, and feelings of isolation or difficulty forming deep connections. But again, the article stresses naming this isn't about blaming men, it's about identifying cultural patterns that are damaging to men as well, freeing them from those pressures.
Which leads to kind of the flip side. As these old norms get questioned, something new is emerging.
Exactly. And this is where the source talks about the rise of the emotionally intelligent man.
EQ. Emotional intelligence. That feels like a real shift, seeing that framed as a strength for men.
It really is. And the article points to real-world changes. More men going to therapy, which is huge.
Yeah, talking more openly about struggles, maybe with friends, not just partners.
Supporting each other emotionally, practicing communication that's more mindful, more empathetic. It's happening.
And the source sees this playing out in different areas. Schools, work.
Absolutely. It's reshaping expectations in schools, workplaces, relationships. The article even makes the point that vulnerability, showing self-awareness, is starting to be seen as a leadership quality in some circles, not a flaw you need to hide.
Interesting. Now, you can't really discuss modern identity without bringing in social media, can you? How does the article see its role in all this?
Yes. The double-edged sword, as the article puts it.
Right. So there are positives.
For sure. Social media has definitely provided platforms for important conversations about men's mental health to reach massive audiences. That's undeniable. And you see positive movements too, like influencers promoting healthier body image for men, challenging unrealistic physical ideals.
Okay, but then there's the other edge of the sword.
Exactly, the negative side. The source points to the rise of certain online figures who promote a very specific, often quite aggressive, hyper-masculine image. It actually names Andrew Tate as an example of someone who, in its view, presents a distorted picture of healthy masculinity.
And beyond specific figures, there's just the general pressure online, right? The lifestyle flexing.
Yeah, that constant display of, wealth, perfect lives, emotional detachment even. The source argues this puts huge pressure on young men, setting unrealistic goals and maybe pushing them towards materialism instead of connection.
So what's the antidote, according to the article?
Authenticity, basically. When men share their real experiences online, the struggles, the doubts, the vulnerabilities, that provides a much healthier, more realistic counter-narrative.
That makes sense. And building on that point about struggles, the article directly addresses the mental health crisis among men.
It does, and it doesn't pull any punches. The stats it cites are pretty stark.
Yeah, men being less likely to seek help for depression or anxiety, but then much more likely to die by suicide. It's a devastating reality.
And the article tries to unpack why. Why this gap? It points to things we've touched on, the fear of being judged.
That stigma around seeming weak for admitting you're not okay?
Exactly, the cultural baggage. And sometimes just a lack of obvious, safe places where men feel they can actually talk openly without that fear.
So what are the solutions offered in the source? How do we tackle this?
It focuses on a few key things. Firstly, just normalizing seeking help, making therapy seem less like a last resort and more like, standard self-care.
Okay, and getting others involved.
Yes. Training people like educators and employers to spot warning signs, to know how to offer support, and crucially, backing things like peer support groups for men, dedicated helplines, creating those safe spaces we just mentioned.
It sounds like creating a culture where it's okay for men not to be okay sometimes.
That's a big part of it. And another area where you really see cultural shifts happening is fatherhood.
Oh, definitely. The article talks about how involved dads are today compared to, say, our parents' or grandparents' generations.
It's a huge difference. Things like paternity leave becoming much more common, much more accepted.
Yeah, and just the day-to-day stuff. Diaper duty, school runs, packing lunches. Dads are way more hands-on in those caregiving roles, that were once seen as exclusively female territory.
And the article highlights the benefits not just for the kids, who obviously gain from having actively engaged parents.
But for the relationship between the parents too, right? More satisfaction, shared load.
Exactly. It reinforces this idea that modern masculinity absolutely includes nurturing, includes caregiving, and men can embrace that without it diminishing their sense of self as a man. No shame attached.
That shift is really visible in pop culture too, isn't it?
Yeah.
The article uses that to illustrate the point.
It does. It draws a great contrast. Think about older action heroes like Rambo, hyper-independent, all physical dominance.
Right, not exactly talking about his feelings.
Not so much.
Yeah.
And contrast that with contemporary characters like Ted Lasso. Kind, empathetic, emotionally intelligent.
That's a perfect example. And the source says we're seeing more male characters like that now.
Yeah, protagonists who are written as self-aware, emotionally available, comfortable maybe in non-traditional situations. It mentions shows like This Is Us or Schitt's Creek as examples that really kind of flip the script on traditional male characters.
Showing men who can love openly, say sorry, even cry, and it's portrayed as strength, or at least just human, not weakness.
Exactly, a much broader, more human range of what male experience can look like on screen.
And this isn't just happening in our personal lives or on TV.
Yeah.
The workplace is changing too.
Right, men are adapting to and sometimes driving new norms at work.
Like what kind of things?
Well, using flexible work arrangements, sharing parental leave and responsibilities more equally with partners, maybe pursuing careers that were once seen as predominantly female nursing, teaching, for instance.
So as workplaces get more diverse in general, the old definition of masculine success is kind of shifting too.
Seems so. The article contrasts that old model, maybe focused solely on climbing the ladder, getting the corner office, with a newer understanding that might prioritize things like finding purpose in your work, making an impact, and achieving a better work-life balance. It's not just about the title anymore for many men.
That makes a lot of sense. But it's also crucial to remember, as the article points out, this isn't uniform everywhere, right? Masculinity looks different across the globe.
Oh, absolutely. The evolution is happening globally, but the way it happens varies hugely. The article gives some interesting examples.
Like where?
Like the Nordic countries, for example, where gender equality is really embedded in policy and education from a young age. That shapes masculinity differently.
Okay. And contrast that with?
With somewhere like Japan, perhaps? Where the traditional salaryman culture still puts immense pressure on men, but at the same time, you're seeing new movements pushing for better mental health support. Or Morocco, where men might be navigating between religious traditions and modern global influences.
So each culture is finding its own path, balancing its history with these new global shifts.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all evolution. Which brings us to the role of education in all this. Schools are so important in shaping how boys understand masculinity.
Yeah, the article really emphasizes that. What does it suggest schools and educators should be doing?
Several things. Actively encouraging emotional expression from day one. Teaching consent and respect as core values, not just add-ons.
Tackling gender-based bullying head-on.
Definitely. And making sure boys see diverse examples of men in books, in media shown at school, as role models, showing there isn't just one way to be a man.
The idea being that if you start early, you can help prevent some of those more harmful, rigid ideas about masculinity from taking hold in the first place.
That seems to be the argument. And ultimately, the article pulls all this together to suggest that what we're witnessing isn't really masculinity dying. It's more like it's being actively reclaimed.
Reclaimed. How so? Not like going backwards.
No, definitely not going backwards. The source argues it's about men themselves, all over the world, reshaping what masculinity means to them, embracing a fuller spectrum of what it is to be human, basically.
And how are they doing that? What examples does it give?
Things like forming support groups. It mentions the Mankind Project as one example. Places where men can connect authentically, be vulnerable, practicing self-care, consciously choosing balance over just bravado or putting on a front.
So it's about accepting the whole range.
Yeah.
Strength, yes, but also softness. Silence sometimes, but also expressing emotion, the song, as the article puts it.
Beautifully put. Yeah, embracing the full spectrum.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the main takeaway from this source we've unpacked today. The central argument seems to be masculinity isn't collapsing, it's not in terminal crisis. It's growing, it's evolving.
Right. As everything around us changes society, expectations, values, men are shedding some of those old, maybe harmful, definitely restrictive norms.
And in doing that, they're finding ways to live fuller, freer lives with things like mental health awareness, emotional intelligence becoming much more central to what it means to be a man today.
That's the picture the article paints. And it leaves you with this interesting thought. Whether you call this whole process a crisis or a transformation, well, maybe that says more about your own perspective than anything else.
Yeah. But based on this source, the conclusion it reaches is pretty clear. The future of masculinity isn't less.
It's more complex, more diverse, more human.
So thinking about that final idea from the source, that the future isn't less, it's more, here's something for you, the listener, to mull over. What specific bits of this more do you actually see emerging around you?
Yeah, in the men in your life, maybe. In the media you consume, at work, in your community.
And what do you think these changes, these new aspects of masculinity, actually mean for how we all understand men and boys moving forward?
Definitely something to keep an eye out for. Observe in your own world after this deep dive.
Keep exploring, keep thinking. We really hope this discussion gave you some useful insights into this really fascinating and constantly evolving topic.